So the past few months, we've been looking at the question of what does it mean to be liberated, or what does the word liberation mean? And in Buddhism, we can see we've been looking at that from various angles. And the idea of what it means to be liberated has changed within Buddhism, and it's changed over time. And it's changed as Buddhism has moved from the Indian culture with which it began, and as it moved from India to China, from China to Japan, and now into other countries like the United States. So we've looked at what is liberation from a Hindu perspective and how that's influenced Buddhism. And then we've looked at how the idea of liberation has changed over time within, particularly within early Buddhism. And last time we looked at how Confucianism has influenced Buddhism and Zen. And now today, this is going to be part one of a two-part series on Daoism, because as I was thinking about what I wanted to share, I realized it was just way too much for a 20-minute talk. So I think I decided to divide it into two sections. So we'll just look at the first part today. Daoism is about finding liberation through connecting with the flow of what's called the Tao. And the Tao could be considered synonymous with the natural world. Now, keep in mind that when I'm talking about Daoism, I'm talking about Daoism more from a philosophical outlook. There is something called what's called religious Daoism. That's not something I feel so competent to talk about, although I'm sure there are connections between Taoist ceremonies and Buddhist ceremonies. But we're going to mainly be focusing on Taoism from a philosophical perspective. Liberation is found by removing oneself from society and being alone. In Zen, we talk about the practice of Zazen as being alone together. It's just such a wonderful way to think. I find it's just such a wonderful way to consider as a practice. What does it mean to be alone? And who would want to practice that? We may associate being alone with a kind of a negative state of mind, like I'm so lonely, I don't have any friends, I don't know what to do. But in the Zen tradition, as well as in Taoism, to be alone is to find true contentment, to be okay with yourself. It assumes that you're okay with yourself. But I want to emphasize where this is saying removing oneself from society. Actually, Zen is not so much about removing yourself from society. And while Zen does talk about being alone, it also talks about doing that together as a community. Consider this quote from Simon Man-Ho Wang. It is very hard to find a true sage who, through his self-cultivation, has perfectly combined himself with heaven, or the transcendent Tao, or ultimate reality, whatever you may call it. What does it mean to combine ourselves? To perfectly combine ourselves? What would that look like? So one of the central concerns of Taoism is harmony with Tao, or harmony with nature, with the natural world. And another way of thinking about the Tao is that it's nameless. It's something that cannot be As soon as we try to put a label on it, it is not the Tao. It's no longer the Tao. The Tao is, from a Taoist perspective, this namelessness is the source of our existence. Daoism, like Buddhism, had a founder, and the name of the founder is Lao Tzu. And here you can see an image of him riding on the back of a buffalo. And he is said here to be, this is what he was doing just before he left this world, to retire and become an immortal. So in Taoism, there's this idea that if you practice, if you cultivate, if you combine yourself with the Tao, then you can become an immortal, live forever. Now, that idea has been modified in modern times, but this was a serious concern throughout the history of Taoism, finding the way to immortality. And there's been two ways. Now, this is getting a little bit into religious Taoism, but just to give a little context, there are two ways to become an immortal. One was through medicinal. There's at least two ways. One was through medicinal means, finding the right herbs that would increase longevity. So in Chinese thinking, to live a long life is considered a blessing, and it's something to be strived for. And Taoism talks a lot about living a long life. So finding these herbal concoctions that would lead one to immortality. This is called external alchemy, the changing of the changing of a substance into the elixir of immortality. It may sound strange to our ears that you could become immortal, but this is a serious concern in Taoism. The other way is through internal alchemy, which is kind of what we're doing here with meditation practice. Internal alchemy means to work with the energies of the body and transmute them, to change them. To move, for example, to move base, raw, sexual energy into the energy of enlightenment. So it's not about trying to get rid of any kind of energy as much as it is to refine it, to cultivate it, to transmute it, to use it for the good of all, to become one with the Tao. Because in becoming one with the Tao, the chaos of the world ends. And if everyone were to become one with the Tao, not just individuals, but societies, governments were to align themselves with the natural laws of the universe, there would be an ending of chaos. Lao Tzu was said to have been born on my birthday, September 14th, 604 BCE, and he was born, like the Buddha, under a tree, but in his case, the tree was a plum tree. And the kind of interesting thing about Lao Tzu, this is the legend, is that it's said that he was conceived in the womb 62 years before his birth. So his mother carried him for 62 years in her womb, if you can imagine that. This is, maybe hard for us to understand in modern times. So I would really recommend us to think about what are perhaps some of the underlying symbols of such a story. All of these miraculous stories in our world religions, I think in modern times, it's hard to take them from a literal perspective. So we need to dig a little deeper and get underneath them. what could be the symbolic meaning of somebody being in the womb for 62 years? He was able to speak because he was in the womb for so long. He was able to speak already by the time he was born. As soon as he was born, and he said, "I take my name from this tree." So Li is another name for Lao Tzu, meaning plum ear. His ears were said to be very long. Another name for Lao Tzu came from his already gray hair, which means Lao, and Tzu meaning old boy. It's said that in the Taoist literature that Lao Tzu and Confucius actually met and had a conversation. And the conversation is kind of to show perhaps the superiority of Daoism to Confucianism, or Lao Tzu to Confucius. But keep in mind that Taoism and Confucianism are really not opposed to each other. They are like yin and yang. Their philosophies are more like yin and yang. They balance each other out. So whereas we learned last time, Confucianism and Confucius was very much concerned with the ethics in relationships, the ethics in relation to yourself, in relation to your family, in relation to your community, in relation to the state, and lastly, in relation to the natural world. Relationship is primary in Confucian thinking. So Lao Tzu, he had some different ideas about what would bring about the end of chaos, the end of wars, because both of these philosophers lived in a time of constant warfare and chaos and anxiety, not unlike our own times, right? We're inundated by things that give rise to anxiety. I'm sure you can think of some. Confucius responds to this conversation with Lao Tzu. "I understand how birds can fly, how fishes can swim, and how four-footed beasts can run. Those that run can be snared. Those that swim may be caught with hook and line. Those that fly may be shot with arrows. But when it comes to the dragon, I am unable to conceive how he can soar into the sky, riding upon the wind and clouds. Today I have seen Lao Tzu and can only liken him to a dragon." So this idea of the dragon is also part of Chinese culture. And interestingly, the dragon, the metaphor, the symbol of the dragon it plays a role in instructions for Zen meditation. It's said that the dragon is one that is not snared. That's what Dogen talks about in his instructions for meditation. And he says, Zazen itself is like a dragon taking to the water, which means that a dragon going into the water the dragon finds its natural home. The dragon finds its natural home by entering the water. And when we do Zazen, that's what we're doing. We're finding our home, or we're coming home, not we're finding it. We're returning home. So Confucius talks about Lao Tzu as like a dragon. He can soar. The dragon doesn't get caught by anything. Doesn't get caught. He doesn't get shot like a bird in the air. Doesn't get snared like a four-legged creature, or caught in a net or a hook with a hook like a fish. Nothing can catch it. What are the things that ensnare us? What are the things that ensnare our minds and pull us out from our true home? What is that? What are those things for you? Zazen is to unsnare us, to be like the dragon riding upon the wind. What does that mean, to ride the wind? Here's a story from a Taoist philosopher, Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu studied under Hu Zhi and was friends with Bo Hun Wu-ren. I'm probably butchering these names, forgive me. He worked very hard learning their skills. After learning to ride the wind, he hopped a breeze and went home, causing quite a stir among the populace. Wanting to learn Lao Tzu's unique skill, a student by the name of Yin Sheng went to Lao Tzu's home to study. Teach me, please show me how you do it. How do you ride the wind? He implores him, show me how to ride the wind. He's running after him. If you won't teach me, then just forget it. He turns around to go. A few months later, Yin Sheng returns to Lao Tzu, and Lao Tzu asks him, why did you leave and come back? And the student says, at first I was angry with you for not teaching me, but now I'm over that and have come back to try again. And Lao Tzu says, at first I thought you might have understood, but now I see how dense you are. And then he proceeds, Lao Tzu proceeds to tell him of his relationship with his teacher. After he went through 3 years of training to begin with, after which I didn't dare think of right or wrong or speak of benefit and harm. Only then did I earn a forced glance from my teacher. His teacher wouldn't even look at him until after 3 years of training with him. He ignored him. After 5 years, I was able to think of right and wrong and speak of benefit and harm. But then, only then did I earn a forced smile from my teacher. After 5 years. After 7 years, I attained a level where I could think freely without right and wrong, and I could speak freely without benefit or harm. Only then did my teacher allow me to sit on the same mat with him. After 9 years, I was finally able to think and speak without any regard to right or wrong, benefit or harm. At that time, all I felt was the melding of the internal and external. My body was infused with light. I could make my eyes be my ears be my nose, and my nose be my mouth, with no difference whatsoever. Now, this is a particular, there's a phrase for this, making the eyes hear and the ears see. We find references to this intermingling of the senses in Zen lore. There's a saying, to see with the ears, to hear with the eyes, right? And look at where it comes from, right here in Taoist thinking, right? So Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, which is a central Buddhist figure, the Bodhisattva of compassion is the one who sees, not hears, sees the cries of the world, right? How can you see a cry? This is pointing to the intermingling of the senses. And it's giving us a different perspective on how to view our world, how to use our senses. Can we hear, can we see with our ears? Right? You can use that as an object of contemplation. So let me continue here. Then my mind centered, my form disappeared. My bones and flesh melted away. And before I knew it, I was floating on the wind, going here and there. And in the end, I couldn't tell if the wind was riding me or if I was riding the wind. Now, you want to be my student, but you are so angry and anxious. Neither the sky nor the earth would receive even the smallest portion of your body. So how could you possibly ride the wind? Whoa, so this is such a admonition to a student. It's such an admonition to a student. You know, he's telling him, you got to have more patience, and you have to be committed to doing this for a long period of time. And and he gives him a story of his relationship with his own teacher. And there's a lot of stories in Zen that are similar to this in terms of the length of time of a teacher-student relationship, or what happens in that interaction, the kind of the severity sometimes that is in there. And I can only refer back to my own relationship to my teacher. But one of the things that Zen teaches is that if you have an issue, then sit with it for 10 years. And then after 10 years, sit with it for another 10 years. And after 10 years, 10 more years, sit another 10 years. And you'll find the answer to your question. So it's looking at from a long range. We're so used to finding the quick fixes in our world. We want to find the answers to things immediately. And Taoist practice, like Zen, is asking us to buckle down and to find some depth, find the depth that is within us, and to proceed from that place. There's something that is of benefit in not being given the answer to your question right away, and to sit with it, to stay with it, to not have the approval of a teacher right away. There's something to be gained from that, right? And I think some of you here already are well aware of that through other means. Yeah. Think about these, consider these instructions for Zen meditation. Zen Master Dogen writes, "Do not think good or bad. Do not judge true or false. Give up the operations of mind, intellect, and consciousness. Stop measuring with thoughts, ideas, and views." So let's be clear right from the start. This is not to say that we should have no moral base. It's assuming that the moral base is already well established and in place. Assuming that your ethical foundation is there, then we move to practicing meditation. And in fact, in the Soto school, we say that Zazen and the precepts are one. In other words, we practice the precepts perfectly in the practice of Zazen. All the precepts are kept. So let's not give a superficial understanding of this statement, to not think good or bad, or to not judge true or false. That's what our minds do. We're given a special opportunity when we sit to give that up. In other words, to pay not so much attention to these dualities, to good and bad, good and evil, true or false, right? Don't we hear somebody making false claims to power today? Don't we want to say, hey, that's wrong? And I'm not saying we shouldn't say that, but Zazen is asking us to let that go for the time being. Give up the operations of mind, intellect, and consciousness. Not saying be a dummy. Definitely not. That would be, again, a superficial understanding of meditation. It's not saying be a dummy. Right? It's cultivating awareness. It's saying stop measuring with thoughts, ideas, and views. The reality of our world is far greater than we can possibly comprehend. And we want to get to that place of largeness, of what we call big mind. We want to get to that place of big mind because that's where our nourishment and the source of our energy is, for us to then return to the world, to return to our job, to return to our battles, Each of us has an enemy. We all have enemies, and we would be kidding ourselves if we didn't think we had them. And so we need to return to the source, to the Tao, to find our energy, to maintain ourselves. And then we return to the world to fight. This might sound funny, coming from a Buddhist priest, that we need to fight. But I'm talking about a fight for justice, fight for what's right. But in order to fight for what's right, we need to let go of these concepts of good and bad and spend some time in that spacious mind. Okay. Thank you.